We often imagine the Roman Empire in shades of glory, grand marble statues, triumphant emperors, and powerful legions. But behind the beautiful facade of power and wealth lay a darker truth, a reality of domination and absolute control. Tonight, we journey past the emperors and senators to the shadows, to the lives of the most vulnerable people in Roman society, the enslaved, and among them, a specific group whose lives were a terrifying blend of false privilege and constant, brutal threat: the male concubines. Their lives were not of luxury, but of survival in a society where a master held the power of life and death. Now, settle in if you dare, for tonight we delve into the dark lore. In the Roman world, a person's life was dictated by their social class, and for slaves this meant they were considered property, not people. Their bodies, their labor, and their very lives belonged to their master. This was codified in a terrifying legal principle known as dominica potestas, the absolute power of the master. This meant a master had the right to punish a slave in any way he saw fit, from a simple beating to a torturous death. The law rarely interfered with this power, and in the case of male concubines, their value as a sexual possession and a status symbol did not protect them from this power. In fact, it often put them in a more dangerous position. A master's whim, a moment of anger, or a fit of jealousy could become a death sentence. To truly understand the horror of their lives, we must look past the stories of emperors' pets and see the very real, very brutal punishments they faced on a daily basis. It is a terrifying window into a society that saw human suffering as a tool of control. The punishments inflicted upon male concubines were a chilling combination of physical agony and psychological destruction, designed to remind them of their complete lack of freedom. This wasn't just about discipline, it was about maintaining a system where a human being was considered an instrumentum vocale, a speaking tool. The physical pain was often brutal and public. One of the most common and feared punishments was the whip, but this was no simple instrument. The flagrum was a multi-tailed whip, often embedded with pieces of bone, metal, or lead balls, designed to strip away a person's skin and leave them permanently scarred. These beatings were often carried out in public, transforming the victim's suffering into a spectacle of their master's absolute power. For a concubine, whose value was often tied to their physical appearance, these permanent marks were a physical reminder that they were not a person, but an object, a canvas for their master's authority. But the physical pain was only one part of the torture. The psychological torment was just as, if not more, insidious. Punishments were often designed for public humiliation and social degradation. A slave who disobeyed could be forced to wear a wooden yoke around their neck, known as a furca, and paraded through the streets with a sign detailing their crime. For a male concubine who had been living a life of false luxury, this was a particularly cruel form of punishment. It was a public reversal of their status, meant to strip them of any dignity they may have had. In a society obsessed with honor and reputation, this public display of shame was a powerful tool for breaking a person's spirit and reinforcing the social order. The psychological threat was constant and terrifying. A concubine's life was lived in a constant state of fear, knowing that a single wrong word, a moment of defiance, or a fit of jealousy from their master could result in extreme physical pain, public humiliation, or worse. The luxury they were afforded was a thin veneer over a core reality of total powerlessness. Even the simple act of living in the emperor's house was a form of psychological torture. They were surrounded by unimaginable wealth and grandeur, but they were not a part of it. They were objects within a collection, a living representation of their master's desires. The freedom to choose, to love, or to simply exist on their own terms was an illusion. The punishment for any attempt to reclaim their humanity was swift and brutal, serving as a constant reminder that the walls of the palace were not a golden cage of privilege, but a prison. This combination of physical pain and constant psychological terror was a masterclass in dehumanization, a system designed to ensure that no one at the bottom of society ever forgot their place. For the most serious offenses, and in a master's eyes, this could be anything from a perceived disrespect to an escape attempt, the punishments were even more terrifying, often culminating in a slow, agonizing death. These ultimate punishments were not just about control. They were the final assertion of a master's right to extinguish a life. A master could choose to have a concubine sent to work in the mines, which was considered a form of execution. Roman mines were brutal, dark, and dangerous places where slaves were worked to death. The life expectancy in a mine was notoriously short, and once a person was condemned to the mines, there was no hope of return. It was a terrifying fate, a slow descent into darkness, a life of relentless physical labor and starvation that ended in a premature death. This punishment was not a quick end. It was a prolonged erasure of a human being. Another horrific fate was condemnation to the beasts, damnatio et bestias. This was a brutal form of public execution, a spectacle of violence and entertainment in the Roman arena. A male concubine who fell out of favor could be paraded into the public eye and then thrown to wild animals like lions, tigers, or bears. This death was designed to be not only painful, but also deeply humiliating. To be torn apart by beasts in front of a cheering crowd was the ultimate degradation, a public statement that the person was no better than an animal. It was a symbolic act, transforming the person from a speaking tool into a spectacle of savagery, all for the entertainment of a bloodthirsty crowd. For a concubine, whose life was one of performance, this was a final, horrifying performance on the stage of death. The ultimate punishment a master could inflict was crucifixion. This form of execution was not just about death. It was about maximizing suffering and humiliation. The condemned person would be nailed or tied to a cross, and the process was designed to be long and agonizing, often lasting for days. It was a clear and brutal statement that a slave's life was completely meaningless in the eyes of Roman law and society. The punishment was visible to all, a terrifying public reminder of what happened to those who dared to defy the power structure. For a male concubine, this was the ultimate price for an attempt at freedom or defiance. His body would be left to decay on the cross, a silent warning to others that even the perceived luxury of the imperial palace was not a refuge from the brutal and total power of the Roman elite. The reality of these punishments tells us a truth about Roman history that goes far beyond the glamorous stories of emperors and conquerors. It tells us that for those at the bottom of the social ladder, a master's whim was more terrifying than any law, and a person's worth was only what their owner assigned to them. These punishments were not random acts of cruelty. They were a systemic tool of control, a brutal language of power that completely stripped male concubines of their humanity and personal agency. The luxury they were afforded was a thin veil, a golden cage that could be ripped apart at a moment's notice. The very laws of Rome, which we often praise for their complexity, were built on a foundation that dehumanized millions of people. A foundation where a master could legally inflict unspeakable pain upon his property. It is a stark and powerful reminder that the legal framework of a society can be its most brutal tool of oppression. The stories of these boys are often lost to history, their names and their fates erased by the powerful men who wrote the ancient texts. What we have are fragments, whispers, and the brutal legal codes that confirm their suffering. The male concubine, the instrumentum vocale, had no voice to tell his own story. And in that silence lies the true horror. History, as it is often written, is a story of the victors and the powerful. But the true dark history is found in the gaps, in the lives of those who were never allowed to speak for themselves. The pain and the fear of these individuals were not a part of the grand narrative of Rome, but they were the real price of the empire's power and glory. The cruelty they endured is a dark echo that still reaches us today, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable realities of a civilization we are often taught to admire. This dark chapter forces us to look past the beautiful marble and see the brutal truth beneath. It is a terrifying reminder that the dehumanization of a person is a tool of control that transcends time, a timeless lesson on the dangers of absolute power. When one person has all the control and another has none, the result is a silence where the screams of the innocent go unheard. What does this dark chapter tell us about the true cost of absolute power, the fragile nature of humanity in the terrifying silence of those with no voice? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below.